In a space where money tends to be at the top of everyone's minds, crypto is the last place you think you'd find a public good being established. Which begs the question, frankly, can any projects or services within crypto be considered public goods? Well, today we're going to dive into public goods, what they are, how they can maybe be redefined to fit into crypto, and maybe even some examples that exist today. Let's get into it. So, within the real world, public goods can be defined as a commodity or service that is provided without profit to all members of a society, either by the government or a private individual or organization. And two of the main properties in this case are non excludable, meaning that it's costly or impossible for one user to exclude others from using a good, as well as non rivalrous, meaning that when one person uses a good, it does not prevent others from using it as well. This is a little definition I got from Khan Academy. Shout outs to them. Essentially, this means that through the taxes that you and I pay, public goods are funded and are free to access by anyone in said society. Public goods include police departments, fire departments, the library, and other things that essentially fall under the premise of being non excludable and non rivalrous. Now, how does this change with crypto? Well, let's consider the following, right? Networks as blockchains can be considered as the government. DApps, or decentralized applications on the chain, can be considered as businesses or services, and we can just consider the users people, of course, right? So how does this change with crypto? Well, pretty much entirely, right? Because if you haven't noticed, money is a pretty big part of crypto generally. To use any blockchain really that is worth your time, you're going to need to pay transaction fees for every time you either, let's say, buy an NFT, maybe you do a swap for a different token. Generally, you're going to have to pay a transaction fee either way whenever you use a blockchain. So in this case, the transaction fees you pay to the network when you perform either of these on-chain actions can be considered a tax. However, the difference is that the only thing that those transaction fees or taxes are going to is to pay the miners to validate transactions and essentially secure the network, aka security and maintenance. However, miners only do this because they want money, right? So there isn't that much alignment between the citizens' values and the miners' values. But when the merge happens, again, this is Ethereum specifically, with a certain amount of ETH, citizens will be able to take the place of the miners to secure and maintain the network while also getting paid in ETH, aka the taxes, as well as, of course, the block rewards. So, kind of trying to bring it all around here. In real life, to participate in our societies, a tax needs to be paid to the governing body if you want a relatively safe and smooth experience living there, or in this case, using the chain, right? Now, where it gets tricky is this. How much tax should someone be charged? And what service should that tax money be put towards? Now, obviously, in society, this is an ongoing debate that, frankly, I don't even want to bother touching. But today, again, we're going to focus on the crypto side of things. So, essentially, how do we fund public goods in crypto? Well, unfortunately, if you go by the existing definition of public goods, no on chain project or service that requires you to execute a transaction that changes the state of the chain can be defined as a public good. Pretty much nothing in crypto can be defined as a public good, going by the original definition of public goods, simply because there's a cost to use that service. Even if the cost may be fractions of a penny, let's say on Polygon where transaction fees are really less than a penny, it's still a cost, especially considering you're already making a ton of assumptions about the individual leading up to that point, right? And honestly, this is why I think that we need to agree on a different terminology and just frankly a different definition for defining what public goods are in crypto before we even talk about how we go about funding projects that don't represent the values of what a public good should be. So I'm going to go ahead and take my own little kind of stab at redefining what public goods are, and you can go ahead and roast me in the comments if you think I'm, off. Please do, for real. So first of all, what is the public? Who are the citizens that these goods are being provided to? Well, number one, said citizen has to have access to a device, whether it be a laptop, a phone, a computer, etc., as well as the internet, right? This is the only way to use crypto at this point in time, at this point in life, right? Maybe some point in 2030, we'll be able to access the blockchain via, like the rocks and gravel in the ground. But right now that doesn't exist and obviously doesn't make any sense. So you need a device and obviously internet to get involved in crypto, right? That's number one. Number two, and this is going to be a little more kind of vague in a way, but the ability to pay transaction fees. This is going to change definitely, I think, based on your region as well as the chain that you're using. But for example, let's say you're in a third world country and you want to use Ethereum, right? Well, generally, I would argue that, let's say that, depending on what that medium average amount of income is within that area, or maybe just depending on how much money people have generally within that area, Ethereum probably isn't going to be, unfortunately, the best chain for them to use. It's just too expensive. So how can that be good for the people there? In that case, I don't think, for example, people in a third world country would be able to consider Ethereum itself a public good because they can't even use it. If you can't use it, then what good is it to you, right? That's just kind of my thought there. Now, what about the project or service, right? What do they comprise of? What does a perfect public good project service comprise of? Number one, decentralization. We can also add into that. There should be no ability to upgrade contracts within that service, of course. And number two, the front end should either be hosted on IPFS, or there should be multiple different front ends accessible to people whenever they please. Number two, security, right? This project or service has to be as secure as possible. So, for example, this could be they have audits done. Number two, it's open source in there. And of course, number three, just generally it's stood the test of time. And this is something that I think is very important, especially within crypto, because of how new the space is. There are very few things that really have stood the test of time. So this is why I think it's pretty appropriate to use that, in this kind of secure column here. And the last thing I think a project or service should comprise of is that it should not be competitive in nature, aka it should just really be as neutral as possible. And I realize a lot of what I just said can be considered a little bit vague, just a little bit. But I think there are some pretty obvious examples of the above that I think most people would agree with me on. Number one being Ethereum. I think Ethereum is probably the best example of this, frankly. It's been around for, roughly 6 years now. Anyone can spin up a node and kind of just connect to the network by themselves. They don't need to use a different service provider like an Infura or an Alchemy or whatever to connect to it technically. It's open source. It's essentially ran by the community at this point. It's not competitive in nature. For example, you don't see someone like Ethereum like generally attacking different projects every day on Twitter, for example. You don't see ads for Ethereum anywhere. It's just generally a service that works and performs its duty, essentially. Creates blocks and allows people to generate smart contracts on it, which is amazing. So I would include Ethereum in this. Number two, I would include Uniswap. Uniswap on Ethereum specifically, actually, because I know there are different deployments in different places. But mainly because, and this kind of actually goes to the decentralization kind of aspect, it's not upgradable in terms of the smart contracts. Whenever Uniswap has, the Uniswap Labs, I should say, deployed upgrades to, their product, it was always in versions, aka Uniswap v1 and Uniswap v2 are still available to use today, even though Uniswap v3 is the newest one. That's because you can't just delete smart contracts on a blockchain, right? So in that way, it's not upgradable, and also the front end is also hosted on IPFS as well. Essentially just giving people more trust in being able to use that service. And they've also been around for who knows how long, and arguably kicked off DeFi summer like 3 years ago. Wow, 3 years ago. Jeez. Oh my God, 3 years ago. That's insane. Was it 3 years ago? What? Anyways, and lastly, I'll go ahead and say Tornado Cash as well. They're also kind of fall into the same bucket as Uniswap and just being around for a long time. It's pretty much an industry standard at this point to use it. And frankly, it's just one of those things that I think people just refer to as like the de facto thing, right? Uniswap is like the swapper, right? Tornado Cash is the transaction obfuscator. No one says that, right? But nonetheless, I think both of those do fit a lot of those different criteria in terms of security, decentralization, and just non-competitiveness generally. Now, in terms of some off-chain examples, actually, and this is definitely not going to. It's going to be a little tough to kind of fit this within the definition that I kind of provided, but who knows? Maybe you can give a better definition for it. Open Zeppelin standards, for example, so in this case, the preset contracts that Open Zeppelin, I guess the company, provides people to essentially make all the different tokens and NFTs that you see today. They've been around for quite some time, and a lot of these standards that they have just been kind of iterated on and I'm sure audited very, very thoroughly to make sure that they're safe and available for people to use, essentially. DeFi Llama as well. Just generally, they're open source. They're non-for-profit as far as I'm concerned, alongside L2Beat as well. So just a couple examples there on some off-chain examples. I think Open Zeppelin though is probably my favorite one, just because they provide contracts. It's pretty cool, I think. But now that we have an understanding of what public goods can be considered within crypto, how can we actually fund them, right? That's kind of the big question. Well, as I mentioned earlier, transaction fees on Ethereum alongside block rewards are paid to miners for securing the network, essentially meaning that projects or businesses on the application level get nothing. This applies to pretty much almost every chain. Governance or community vote would be the most obvious way, assuming that the chain that we're on collects a portion of the transaction fees and sets them aside for stuff like this. And frankly, most of them don't, as I just mentioned. However, on top of that, there would have to be not only a way to disincentivize whales, since most governance voting power can be bought with tokens, but also a way to make sure that everyone participating is actually an individual citizen and not some dude running 100 different accounts to vote for their favorite project, right? Frankly, it's a tough question, and it's going to require a lot of kind of comments from the community and just kind of coming together and like kind of thinking about these different issues and topics and conversing about it. And that's kind of why I wanted to make this video today, just to get the conversation going. Frankly, I can't tell you how public goods can be funded now into the future, but I do think it'll help just to decide what public goods are generally in the first place, and then probably go about saying, okay, like what's going on? How should we kind of doing this thing first? And yeah, just let me know in the comments below what you think. Until next time, my friends, I will see you guys on the next one. All right? Peace out.